All right. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, panelists, for what was a great sort of prelude to this conversation. And just a reminder, I am Alexis Williams here at Stagwell. Thank you again for being here. And we have an incredible conversation, so I do want to dive right in. Joining me on stage, I have Pragad, who's the CEO and president of Newsweek, Giancola, who is the publisher and CEO of the New York Post, and Mike Reed, chairman and CEO of Gannett USA Today. So thank you all so much for being here. We're going to dive in with a lightning round and then get into the broader conversation. But what we really want to talk about today is you all work for incredible publications, big brand names, collections of reporters, editorial talent, and in your case, multiple entities that have great legacies, but really importantly, vibrant futures ahead. So we want to talk about how you're innovating your business model, reaching audiences, thinking about all the technological disruptions that are happening in news. But to warm us up, we're going to start with a fun question. Where do you get your news in the morning? And you cannot say your own platform. Deb, go ahead.
This is like asking, when your spouse is there, who are you most attracted to?
Right.
And I have my editor-in-chief there. Of course, I'm always Newsweek. But being a business owner and CEO, I value business news and economic news, so I go to the Journal for that. Then for the broader news, I like to consume a variety of both progressive, conservative, and centrist publication. Obviously, living in New York, I end up in New York Post often, with a vast network of USA Today, I often end up there. Then to be on top of the industry, obviously, I read Adweek and Digiday.
Great. Very robust diet. Sean, your turn.
Again.
Oh. Is that on?
Now it is.
There we go.
Well, besides starting with the Post, I kind of look at it in three tiers. I start with my broad publications. So I read the Journal, and I read the New York Times, usually through feeds or newsletters. And then I think what the narrow news has been doing is, I think, phenomenal with Puck and the Semaphore and the information. So I get a lot of newsletters and I skim through them and see what's the hot topics that they're discussing. And then I go to the industry news. I get, Ad Age, Adweek, Ad Exchanger, and I get what's going on in the industry. So I kind of look at it that way. And after those three tiers, my hour train ride's over.
Perfect. Mike?
Yeah, I definitely am, as described in the first panel, a very high end of a news junkie. And I probably spend the first 90 minutes or so of my morning consuming news. I start with a cup of coffee, though. First thing I do in the morning, I get a cup of coffee, and then I
think that's everyone, yeah.
I go into my office, and I'm consuming news from multiple formats at the same time. I have local news and CNBC on my television in my office, and I'm start with newsletters I get, and then I go to certain platforms. And I'm definitely by genre as well. I'm looking at hard news, I'm looking at technology, AI, I'm looking at sports news, I'm looking at, and then of course our own platforms, USA Today, and my local news, which is one of our papers, and I go very specifically. I'm a huge New York sports fan, so I'm on the New York Post to get my sports news, but definitely I spend about 90 minutes in the morning as I kick off my day. Make sure nothing blew up in the morning, check my email right away to make sure nothing blew up. We're a global organization. And then I spend really 90 minutes getting up to speed as I can on all facets of news.
So you heard it here verbatims. CEOs read lots of news. You should advertise in news. Just a little plug. But I think that's great. And I think it does show, it leads, it's sort of a forward indicator to some of the conversations we're going to have about diversification of platforms, because all of you cited different places you get the news. So we'll get to that. But before we do, I want to give each of you guys the opportunity to talk about what you're doing with your own brands, because all of you have storied brands. I think everyone who knows the news knows each of your publications. So tell us something that we would be surprised to know about each of the news outlets that you run, and that we would probably benefit from knowing more about. So we'll just go down the line. Dev, start with you.
Well, Newsweek once upon a time was a very iconic, large print publication, weekly. Today we are predominantly a digital publication with 3, 4, 5 million readers every single day. So that part of the transformation has been very, very successful. But what a lot of people do not know about us is very quietly we have built a very nice professional business. And that was predominantly driven by our rankings business, which is really the fastest growing part of our business, quite profitable. On the back of it, we have launched a series of deep industry verticals. Healthcare is our biggest. We are the biggest global hospital ranking service provider. And in America, we go very, very deep. And on the back of it, we do a variety of membership services for hospital CEOs. We have a healthcare B2B newsletter, which has an open rate of over 40%. And now we're in the process of bringing a lot of the data and research behind that in-house so we can start to sell data as service to some of these industry verticals, right? Then once we do that, then what are the things we do to kind of go to other industry verticals?
So I guess the thing that a lot of times when I go into a meeting, the first thing I have to mention to folks is that even though we have New York in our title, we are a national brand. We reach 80 million people a month on our 3 URLs that we have. And that's the second thing is we diversified, not only are we a national news organization, but we have a very big beachhead in entertainment and lifestyle with Page Six, and then we have a streaming site called Decider. So I would say what people don't understand sometimes about the Post is how nationally we are and how diversified we are. If that's a takeaway that this group could say, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think with us, the thing that folks don't recognize is you think about USA Today, Gannett, or USA Today, and you think about a dying legacy print business. And we couldn't be more the opposite. We're such a growing business in the digital ecosystem. And what USA Today has, we have a network, USA Today Network. We have 220 local publications in 44 states across the country, plus the USA Today, which reaches 50 states. And so our audience on the digital platform is actually the largest audience as measured by ComScore in the United States of any legacy news media publisher. People don't realize that. And over the last 5 years, we've gone from 100 million uniques a month to 200 million uniques. So, and we know so much more about that audience today than we did 5 years ago because of technology. So I think people underestimate the actual power of a national with a local platform like we have at Gannett. People don't understand that.
And how many local publications do you own?
We own 220 markets where we have daily newspapers.
Wow, that's a huge reach. So now looking at it's really helpful because I think grounding in the evolution of each of your brands and also the diversity of your brands has really been good basis. I want to talk a little bit about audience, which is sort of the golden thing we all chase. Loyal audiences who trust our brands look to us for information that they can count on when they need it the most. How are you all thinking about understanding your audience and evolving your business and product offerings to address the needs of that audience? And how are you thinking about embracing the legacy that has been so strong, but importantly, innovating for how, to our first panel, consumption habits, behaviors, and interests are evolving? And that's a jump ball for anyone who wants to dive in first. Not all at once, guys.
I can go. I mean, from the Post perspective, since we do reach a large audience of 80 million, my editor-in-chief and I look at it like we call it high-low. And we have a lot of high-income, big job CEO decision makers, policymakers reading the Post because of what we do and the influence that we have. And when I mean low, I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that in a broad sense that we reach a huge audience that comes to us for a myriad of reasons, whether it's entertainment, sports, news. So I think that's with a big news brand, I think you have to sometimes dissect your audiences and communicate to them very differently from your edit, from your marketing, and from your distribution. So I think that's sort of how we look at our audiences. And to be honest with you, I'm looking at my colleague at the Wall Street Journal. 40% of the Wall Street Journal folks, because we're part of the same company, read the Post. Most people would never think that. So that allows us to think about how do we speak to that audience a little differently, and also make an impact for marketers who want to reach that audience.
Yeah. So for what I would say is that there's a bit of a flywheel here in that we have so much data now and we understand consumer habits as they come to our platform, and that informs our content decision making. We also mix that with the business side, understanding over the next 5 years what would our ideal audience be if we're going to be with 200 million uniques. Where would we want them to be? What would the top 5 or 6 categories be for our business customers? And so that kind of understanding of what kind of content do we need to produce, understanding that we're a content organization, not a hard news organization, is incredibly important. But then letting data feed the consumption that or the content that we produce, understanding how leveraging technology actually and AI to make a more personalized experience for everybody that comes to our platform has been incredibly helpful, because not only is our audience growing, but the engagement with that audience is growing. And it's been a really incredible journey that we've been on that I think, going back to your first question, people don't really understand. We're also leveraging social media, and Jessica made this comment in the first panel, which is part of our strategy. We have 97 million followers on social media, and we use those platforms, to actually drive back to our platform. We're using it as a test ground. We're using it to be a bit more edgy. We're using it to put our brands in front of a different demographic, with the intent really of being back on our platform. And so I couldn't be more excited about where we are. I do think that the business side still has catching up to do to understand the real value of our audience. And we see it every day with our current customers, how well we deliver, and the value of the money spent with us. And we need to kind of broaden that story.
At Newsweek, we have a fairly large audience, so we want to drive a lot of engagement with them. And in everything that we do, we look at our consumer audience as well as our small but really valuable growing professional audience. On the consumer side, we really measure, how is our coverage fair and is our coverage trustworthy? And we thought the best way to do that is to get feedback from our own users. So the wonderful thing about running a digital media is that you can deploy a lot of technology to get a lot of feedback. Our team launched a fairness meter about a year or so ago. We have more than 4 million people who have voted and engaged with that. Nearly 70% of them do say, our coverage is fair, which is nice. We want feedback from our users, so we love to engage with them and do a lot of things. And like with New York Post, when you do have a fairly large audience, you do have a lot of professionals and C-suite people who are there. And now that we have access to a lot of data, and we've got Josh Autry there who runs that for us. He's amazing. I think he used to be at USA Today before. We picked up a lot of great skills from there. Thank you for that. And he often tells me how we can leverage that to build some of our other businesses, right? So based on that, we've launched a number of newsletters. We have driven registration for our webinars and a lot of things. So we're also evolving from being purely a content play to becoming a tech and data play. Like by leveraging those two, you can do so many more creative things, right? So it's quite exciting.
That's great. And on the flip side of this, and we're going to have a question just on AI in a little bit, but there is a concern about how are you keeping your audiences, right? As more AI players come into the mix, more different aggregators or mechanisms by which people can get news that isn't direct to site or isn't in some of the more traditional manners. What do you think the value is, and how do you keep your audience coming back to you, knowing that there are these macro trends in the industry around content disaggregation?
I'll go first. I would say a couple things. One is you have to provide value to that consumer to keep the consumer coming back and to keep the consumer on your platform. And to provide value, we're, with every single visit, understanding what that consumer's interested in and personalizing the experience. Every single time they come back, it's a more personalized experience. And so that's really what we want to do, is create the best value we can by making the experience on our platform as personal as we possibly can. And the second thing is uniqueness. Can we produce content that consumers can't get anywhere else? And that's where our local news really comes into play, and why we drive so much audience in, across the country in 220. We have 220 markets. We have Peoria, Illinois. People in Peoria, Illinois are only going to get comprehensive soup to nuts content on Peoria, Illinois on our platform. And so that unique aspect provides value to a consumer, but then really personalizing the experience is ultimately our goal.
Yeah, I would play off of what Mike was saying. I think personalization is part of our roadmap. I'm not sure we've cracked the code completely, but I think giving a better user experience is what I would say. The UX of what you're doing is really important. I also would play on what Mike said is that your voice and your tenor and your brand matters. People come to the Post not because we just cover the Pope. It's how we cover the Pope, and it's the depth of what we do. So I think you have to create a relationship with your user. I think smaller publications, as I alluded to, have been doing a really good job of creating that voice and that tenor and that DNA that they have. And I think even a big publication like the Post, particularly what Jessica was saying in the earlier panel, platforms have made it a little bit more difficult, particularly with big news brands like the Post. So how do we get more direct audience? How do we take that direct audience, make them even more loyal and more engaged? It's a challenge that we continually have to evolve and handle.
Um, you know, Today the competition is not just among the news publishers; it's really up against the big platforms who people just are addicted to being in those platforms, right? So the landscape is very tough. So you do have to provide something unique and something very personalized. And I think this is where AI and technology could be actually super helpful. So on our homepage, we're experimenting with a range of AI tools to really personalize a lot of the content so that people do have a very memorable experience. Based on that, even create dynamic, feeds for people or newsletters eventually, so that people get a very curated experience in a very dynamic way. And I think if you do have a startup mindset and you embrace these disruptive technologies, what you can do is quite amazing. So then the question really becomes, how do you create a culture of innovation within your organization, right? And you remove hurdles and friction, and you allow this innovation, test and learn to happen, because these tech companies are amazing at that, because that's their DNA. As news companies, our DNA has always been content driven, and journalists have always been the heart of it. But now we're up against all these big tech firms. So how do we compete against them, right? But I think AI could be a massive enabler, right? It really breaks down barriers and allows us to compete with them.
Yeah, and that's a great segue, I think, to the next piece of this puzzle, which is really around the product and really around the core ways in which you are delivering the news and thinking about delivering the news in the future. Even when you were talking about your own habits, I heard some print, I heard some podcasts, there's newsletters, tip sheets. What do you think is next? Because there is certainly a barrage and a deluge of a lot of different types of content and a lot of different formats. So how are you thinking about that product innovation? And what do you think consumers are really craving, especially from more traditional legacy news like you all?
I can tackle it. um, I think we're looking at I look at our business kind of in two ways. We have our O&O, which is owned and operated, and then you have everywhere else. And I think the challenge is, especially being in charge of all the revenue, is how do you engage an audience and have a business plan there? So the O&O we talked about, how do you get a more loyal audience? How do you create better engagement, a better user experience, and so forth? On the flip side of that is how do you diversify your business that's sometimes off platform? We're making big investments in newsletters. As I said, I get a lot of my content from newsletters because it's just easy, and it's quick, and it's something that I engage in, and I can really consume at my habit. So diversifying, we've never really put our toe in the water. We've got some sports podcasts. We're launching 3 news podcasts in the next 6 months, really about a couple are personality driven, one's around news. We want to meet our audience where they are. Social's a little bit of a challenge, as TikTok and so forth. It's not the easiest advertising. YouTube is. We're making big strides into YouTube, and are building our channels there. We launched an XM satellite radio show for Page Six. So I think have to look at your brand and where your audience is and meet them there, and then figure out what the business model is around that. And it's complicated, but I think newsletters and video and audio are part of it.
I agree with what you said. You have to follow where the audience are and really meet the needs where they are. And you often can do that only through trial and experimentation, because you can come up with a hypothesis, this could really work. We have a massive following in TikTok, but we have really no idea how to monetize it, right? But we were very pleasantly surprised how Apple News Plus has been remarkably successful for us, right? It really went from almost nothing to a massive, massive revenue driver for us. Just 3 years ago, it was literally nothing. Today, it's like one of the biggest business drivers. If you didn't have an open mind, we would not have, stumbled upon that. So I think we just need to be very, very open-minded, keep experimenting. The distribution channels are massive. I think it was in the previous panel someone was talking about like how do you treat these distribution channels to experiment, figure out, and try and learn new things, right? The consumer behavior will continue to change dramatically because just like we are embracing AI, every industry is embracing AI to innovate. So the whole landscape is going to be dramatically changing. The only certainty is that there's going to be a lot of change, right? So how do you kind of create a culture that embraces change and is comfortable with change, and then you evolve from there?
We're trying to ultimately have our platform be where folks spend their time and where they engage with us. We use other channels as a as a means to meet the audience, see the audience, but bring the consumers to us on our platform. More than experimenting. We're not just a text business anymore. You're not just going to read a story. We have tons of video, and video is our fastest growing means of delivering news to consumers. And we're using podcasts, and newsletters is a huge avenue for us to reach consumers where they come to us from our newsletter. So we're driving down the traffic that's coming to us from other social media sites through links to people just spending time on our platform. AI and technology is hugely helpful in that. But our goal really is to have consumers get whatever experience they want, podcast, video, text, whatever it is, on our platform.
Yeah, that's great. So penultimate question, just a warning for the audience to get yours ready. We've heard AI referenced in terms of, implementation and innovation, really trying to put it within your newsrooms. Give me some concrete examples of how you're using AI for your content, but then also how you're thinking about AI as a either force for good or force for bad as we look ahead to the publishing industry. And would be curious, sort of practical tips, how are you thinking about it in this moment? But then longer tail, what do you think both the challenges and opportunities are? Because AI is certainly here to stay and only going to accelerate. Dev, to your point earlier. So anyone can jump in, but
I'll go, and I'll try to keep it as short as I can. You can talk about how we're using AI and how we can use AI for hours, it seems. But there's the obvious efficiencies on the back end, things that we're doing to make our business more efficient, and be able to then reallocate that resource towards growth. But on the content side specifically, AI is allowing us to generate more content because we can take public information, data, press releases and things, and turn them into stories much more quickly, have a human eye as an editor, and publish those. So we can publish 12 to 20 stories a day from one editor versus one story a day from that journalist years ago. So the volume of content that we produce is helpful to engaging or growing our audience. But then how we write the headline, how do we summarize the story at the top? AI is super helpful in understanding and putting together for us what's going to engage best with the consumer. How should you actually craft that headline? How should you summarize the story at the top? What's the first paragraph look like so that you can keep the reader engaged? And so there are ways we're utilizing AI to engage better with our readers, tell the story a little bit better. A big philosophy of Gannett's is we want to cover the story and report the story. We don't want to be the story. And AI is helpful in combing through your story to make sure we're not becoming the story, we're just reporting the story. So there's so many ways technology and AI will benefit our ability to engage better with consumers. But there's the negative side, and that's there's copyright laws in this country. They're here for a reason. And AI companies, technology companies steal our content every day. The analogy I make is if you own a shoe store and every single morning you wake up and you go into work and you open your shoe store and all the shoes are gone. Somebody stole them all. And they're sitting out in your parking lot with a table selling the shoes at half price. That's what you call the police. And the police come and they arrest them. right? Who do we call? Nobody's paying attention. Copyright laws are violated every day. Our content's stolen. We block the AI companies. We block technology companies stealing from us. But a little known thing is that those companies still have to tell their bots to honor our block. If they don't, they still steal our content. So our content's stolen even if we try to block it. That has to be fixed in order for news organizations that do the work for our democracy, in order for them to really, truly have a chance to exist 10, 20, 30 years from now, there has to be a more fair or level playing field around copyright laws.
So I'll start there. We decided not to do a deal with any of the big AI companies because, I mean, they were offering a few $1,000,000. We think that wasn't, good enough, and it's not going to move the needle for us, right? So we decided not to do a deal. We'll see what happens down the line. And like Mike said, we have blocked a lot of these AI bots, but some of them don't, recognize that. So we do track a lot of bot activities coming in and scanning everything. I think the culture in Silicon Valley can be a little reckless. It's like, well, we'll build it and then we'll figure out what happens. We'll deal with the collateral damage later. So that really is a concern, right? It is a very fragile ecosystem. We've been hammered by a lot of changes in the last couple of decades. So that really is a concern, right? And also, if the consumers through this are able to get access to that information much cheaply in an easier way, then why would they come to us? And ultimately, we do want people to come to us and spend a lot of time with us. On the way we embrace AI within the newsroom, there was a lot of concern among journalists, right? Like, what's going to happen? Would people, lose jobs and things like that? So we frame it that AI is a massive enabler. It's not that to replace people, but it's really a massive enabler. There's a lot of low-value work that AI could do, so the journalists could actually go and do some really high-quality work that only humans can do, right? And it massively increased productivity, efficiency, and the quality of the work that we are doing. And we have seen amazing performance coming from that, right? Like the number of articles being produced, the quality of the articles being produced. And AI is only going to get better. So if you are very open-minded to it, there's a lot of things that we can do with it.
I mean, not to pile on, but of course, the AI companies, we did a deal with ChatGPT at News Corp, way above my pay grade. But for the other LLMs out there, we're doing the same thing, blocking. There's a lawsuit going on as well with some of them. But I think there's another big risk to AI, and Jessica alluded to it a little bit on the last panel, is where we get our audiences from, and Gemini and everything else that Google's doing with the summary and then pushing the content down and links and the supportive news is a big threat. Because I do believe once you get them to your site, then you can tactically look at your own AI to keep them there. But there's a big challenge that the news organizations have with AI is preventing your audiences ever to get to your site. And I think that's something that is a challenge for all of us. And then once you get them to the site, that's the positive side. That's when they're coming to you because they want to learn from your brand. And that way you can then start customizing things where we've got two things going on. We've got an AI app coming out with the Post, and then we're doing some things with the web as well. All of it has to do, though, tying in your content. So if you're there reading about the Yankees, we're going to give you great content, but then we're going to use AI to actually accelerate how you can discover more on the Yankees, particularly using the LLM to aggregate more things the Post and News Corp has on that topic.
That's super helpful. So great answers, and I think even interesting amongst this group, the diversity of approaches towards the large AI companies, but then I think sort of universal agreement that there's a tremendous internal opportunity for efficiency and really superpowering editorial. So last question for you all before we go to audience. If you could have everyone in this room read one story each of your publications published this year, just in 2025, what would that story be? And then we will include these in our follow-up notes so you can easily click to them and read them. But let's hear that, and then we'll turn to the audience for some questions.
I'll go first. I'm a sports junkie as well as a news junkie. I'm a huge sports fan, and I'm really proud of the ad meter work that we do for the Super Bowl, one of the most watched and televised events of the year. And we have a platform for consumers to go on throughout the Super Bowl and log the best commercial. And then we report on all the top commercials, and we actually go on the Today Show on Monday morning and reveal the winner and stuff. But what consumers say and how we report on the commercials that were run during the Super Bowl is a really, really cool and fascinating thing to me.
We love it too at Stagwell. So, Sean.
I'll cheat a little bit and just talk a little bit about a topic. And I think we've done an amazing job of covering what's going on with Gaza and Israel. We have a newsletter that's hugely popular. Most people wouldn't think that the Post would lead that conversation. And from a national level, I've gotten so many people come up to me and say, I love what you're doing, covering that difficult situation, and how important it is to the country and to society.
So we have a video series called Unconventional. It's run by a journalist who's a veteran, and he has amazing access. He's the only journalist who was allowed to fly in a B-2 bomber, and we had full access to it. It can hold only 2 people, so he was one of them. And during this inauguration, the Secret Service gave him complete access to look at behind the scenes, full security setup and everything. Thanks to him, I've got to meet a lot of 4-star generals, got to understand about American military might, and it's pretty impressive. I love it.
All right. So unconventional coverage of the war in Israel and Super Bowl. Definitely an eclectic mix of reading for this weekend. All right. So looking out to the audience, any questions? Anyone want to jump in? Can start right here.
Hi, I'm Zach Kidd. I'm just curious about, I've heard a lot of discussion around engagement. What are your thoughts around comments and readers engaging with news in terms of how you value that? I think when you juxtapose a popular sort of YouTube video, at minimum, that's getting maybe 1 million likes and 100,000 comments. And then when you look at a New York Times front page story, that might be getting 1,000 likes and or 1,000 comments. So I'm just curious from a business perspective, how do you look at that type of interaction, and then also that balance against paywalls? It feels like every 4th article I have to pay $39 a month to access.
On the first part of your question, comments are an important part of our strategy. It's an important part of continued engagement with consumers, more engagement with consumers, and with technology today. It's easier for us to have comments because we can block out the stuff that goes too far, that becomes hate, which is something that was harder to do in newspapers, or the online version of newspapers started to pull back from comments because of the hate that came into it. But with technology now, we have a lot more control over making sure it's a civil discussion. And so comments is a huge part of our future in terms of growth and engagement with consumers. And in the opinion side is as well for us. We just encourage all of our publications. We don't tell anybody locally exactly what they have to do, but we encourage them to have opinions on both sides. How can we report on both sides? How can we deliver opinions on both sides? And those things, the opinion section and the comment section, are huge parts of our engagement with consumers, part of our future.
So for us, comments, the major KPI that we track, because it's a big form of engagement. Some of our best performing articles have a few thousand comments. Of course, it's very hard to compete with the big platforms. And it's also an amazing way to gather first-party data, right? So the more they engage, then we understand what they're doing, and then we can then leverage that to get them to come back to the site. So it is an incredibly important KPI for us.
Yeah, I would just pile on that. The one thing that I would say, this was a huge debate a couple years ago at the Post, because we tried it like 10 years ago and it was a train wreck, because it just the toxicity and the things that we had to govern. But as Mike was alluding to, I think technology and monitoring has come a long way. The other thing that I think publishers, at least us, is how do you create a more two-way conversation? and text and so forth. We've actually tested this platform where members of our sports product could actually text with our editors during games and so forth. So I think this commenting and two-way conversations with your audience is going to become more important, because I think the new generation feels like access and authenticity really matters.
Yeah, in the back there.
I unfortunately have two questions. The first one being, if we talk about the importance of personalization, how does original content really fit into that? You know, if we've got an off-the-wall original feature, how do we make that work? And the second one being, with AI, is it the chicken or the egg? Are you seeing what content of yours is doing well on external platforms, ChatGPT, and then you better optimize your content for it? Or is it the other way around and you're doing content that you hope will do well on there? Or are there tools you're using? Yeah, two questions.
I'll go first, and just starting on the second question. We're doing both, but we definitely have a trending news team and a breaking news team, and so we're looking across social media and other media platforms to understand what's trending, what's hot right now, and our trending news team will get on that, and we'll start to create content around what's trending and what's breaking right now, and that's been a huge audience driver for us too. So we're not sitting, in a vacuum trying to create content we think everybody will like. We are listening and looking at what's going on out there and creating content that's immediately responsive to what's trending and breaking today. As far as local content, that is unique and it's not relevant to everybody in a community. But if you're on our platform and you're looking at local content, whatever does catch your eye, whatever you do spend time with, we have so much depth and breadth of content that we have stuff that is akin to that, and we can immediately now through personalization serve it up to you. So depending on what you engage with on the local platform, we can then make a more personalized experience for you. But we cover a breadth of local topics because there's stuff that's of interest to everybody, and that's really our national content strategy as well. We have to be in sports, we have to be in health and wellness, we have to be in money, we have to be in investigative reporting, we're in hard news, we have to be across the board so that we have something that appeals to everybody.
Well, when you're doing original content or deeply reported feature reporting and things like that, you are making a lot of investment. So you want to make sure you're getting the return on it, right? It really needs to meet a business KPI, either drive audience, drive subscriptions, or increase brand reputation, all of that. And I think you want to make an informed decision because there's a lot of investment, your valuable time, money, all of that is going in there. So the more you embrace all of that, the bigger the impact your story is going to have, and that's how you as a journalist is also going to have a bigger impact, right? So in order to really build a successful business, we have to completely embrace it and be very open-minded to the feedback it's giving, because data sometimes can be very difficult because it may tell you things that you may not like and may have to change and evolve and adapt to it. But successful companies do that relentlessly. That is the culture they live and breathe.
I think last question right here. Yeah.
Hi, Rochelle Ford from the Page Society. It's a member organization for chief communication officers and their teams. And it's a global organization. One of the things that's come up in many of our conversations, particularly in Europe, was the idea with the new, and I think we talked about this, the news deserts that are beginning to exist in local markets. And there's always been a strong relationship between the chief marketing officers and the marketing sides of businesses and corporations. And it's always been let's pitch a story from the comm side. But recognizing that when you deal with social responsibility now and democracy and making sure that your employees and things stay engaged, the idea of partnership with the communication side might be a new approach for the local news and information sources. And so I was curious, particularly for the two who are in local markets, because you own so many publications and news channels in local markets, how have you begun to do partnerships, outreach, so it's not trying to sell products and services, but really trying to build community?
Well, I would say I would start by saying first that we have been kind of the center of community and building community in these local towns for 100 years. The local newspaper is really, everybody knows their local news brand, what the local newspaper's name is, and everybody generally has a negative nickname for it too, but everybody knows what that is. But I would say that we have been at the center of community for 100 years. What's happening today with technology and the theft of content, and where consumers spend so much of their time, and where businesses naturally follow consumers with advertising, what's happened to small market, what really matters now is scale. And that's why I talked about in the beginning, people don't really understand with Gannett, with USA Today Network, we have 200 million uniques. We're doing about 1.5 billion page views a month. We have scale. What that allows us to do, each of those local markets we're in benefits from that scale. Right now, there are about 2 local newspapers per week that are closing, creating news deserts across the country. Inside of Gannett, we don't have that. We're keeping newspapers in local markets, and I say newspapers because that's what they always have been. But our business is really online now, even though we still have print publications. But we're keeping in 220 markets, plus we have weeklies and things like that. We're keeping news organizations in those markets alive. We talk every day in our executive committee meetings and our board meetings about not creating news deserts, because we believe in the social mission that Gannett has. We believe in what we do to prevent corruption and chaos in our communities, and we believe in our role in furthering our democracy. And so we are highly aware of that. We have 50 to 75 newspapers that borderline break even, don't make any money, but we keep them alive because they're part of our overall scale of our business. And so I think that continued kind of news desert creation is a real problem, a real issue that our country faces. And there are studies that are done, because there's been enough time now, that show that there is more local corruption amongst elected officials and paid officials in towns without news businesses than those that have them. So I don't have a great answer for how we stop a news desert creation. I can tell you though, at Gannett, we won't contribute to that. We keep all of our businesses alive.
I'll be brief. We look, we are, like I said, we're a national brand, but New York is our home and our DNA, and we feel a commitment to New York. And my editor-in-chief, Keith Bull, and I, for probably over the last 3 years, PR and communications really lived on the edit side of the world. And today, my teams are more communicating with brands, leaders, and so forth in the community to create opportunity. They might be paid opportunities, or they might be just organic opportunities. We've never done that in the past, but I think we realize, it's hard to say New York's a news desert, but when you think about it, where I sit is the New York Times. It's a wonderful publication, but it's a global publication, and the Wall Street Journal, which we publish, is a global publication. The Daily News, they used to. I don't think the investment's been there, so we are really tackling the opportunity to be the voice of New York, and that's that. And on a political side, I know I'm in D.C. Is we have great relationships on both sides of the aisle. I mean, we think the mayor is going to be at our table tomorrow. I mean, like we've developed great relationships across the board. We think it's really important from a comms level. So I think it's, I think journalism has to also not only think about monetization, but thinks about what the community and the communications matter.
All right, well, unfortunately, we've reached end of time. I want to do a quick recap because I was taking notes of some of the things I thought you said that were most important, and I hope the audience will leave with. So, Mike, for you, 220 local papers, 97 million social media followers, and 1.5 billion page views in a month. So incredible reach. And while you are optimistic that AI can help increase the amount of stories, 12 to 20 per one editor in a day as opposed to 1 to 2, you are very concerned about the fact that there's sort of free range stealing of your content and there's not much you can do to protect it. Sean, for you, I think the diversification of the New York Post and how you've really mapped audiences and are now refining and evolving your communications channels against those I found it fascinating that 40% of Wall Street Journal readers actually read the Post as well. So thinking about how you are maximizing audiences across platforms and really growing from there. And then Deb, I think the piece you said that really stuck with me is, how are you applying a startup mindset amidst all of this technology and embracing the balance of traditional editorial and the quality of news journalism, but not being afraid to experiment and try new things, and really sort of dig into that and create a culture of innovation from within Newsweek. So with that, that will conclude our program for today. Thank you guys all
Thank
so
you.
much for being here. Have a great Correspondence Dinner weekend.